Sarah Martinez wiped down the last table at Mike's Diner as the afternoon rush began to wind down. The small-town restaurant in Cedar Falls wasn't much to look at, but it had become her sanctuary after returning from overseas. The familiar routine of taking orders, serving coffee, and cleaning tables gave her something normal to hold on to when the memories threatened to surface. She rolled up her sleeves as the temperature in the diner climbed, revealing the intricate tattoos that covered her forearms. The ink told a story that most people in this quiet Iowa town would never understand. Eagle, globe, and anchor symbols intertwined with coordinates from places most Americans couldn't pronounce. A skull with crossed rifles marked her time with Force Reconnaissance. Roman numerals tracked deployments that had taken her to the darkest corners of the world. 3 college students occupied the corner booth, their laptops spread across the table as they worked on what appeared to be a group project. Sarah approached with the coffee pot, offering refills with the same quiet professionalism she brought to everything. "Those are some serious tattoos," commented Jake, a business major with perfectly styled hair and clothes that cost more than Sarah made in a week. His tone carried that particular brand of condescension that came naturally to people who had never faced real hardship. "Thank you," Sarah replied simply, continuing to pour coffee. "Did you get them done locally?" asked Emma, Jake's girlfriend, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "They look so detailed. Almost like military tattoos, but I mean, obviously not real ones." The third student, Marcus, snickered. "Yeah, right. Like someone who actually served would be working at a diner in the middle of nowhere. Those are probably just designs she found online." Sarah's hand remained steady as she filled Marcus's cup, though something cold settled in her chest. She had heard variations of this conversation before. People saw a young Latina woman serving coffee and made assumptions. They couldn't reconcile their narrow view of what a veteran looked like with the reality standing in front of them. "The eagle, globe, and anchor especially," Jake continued, gesturing at her forearm. "That's Marine Corps, right? But come on, look at her. Does she look like someone who could handle boot camp?" Emma giggled. "Those skull tattoos are trying so hard to look tough. I bet she got them to impress some boyfriend." Sarah finished pouring and stepped back from the table. "Will there be anything else?" "Actually, yeah," Marcus said, his voice getting louder as he warmed to his performance. "I'm curious about the story behind the fake military ink. Did you watch a lot of war movies? Read some books? I mean, it's kind of disrespectful to people who actually served, don't you think?" Other customers began to turn their heads. Sarah felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention, the same feeling she had experienced countless times since leaving the Corps. People questioning her service, her capabilities, her right to wear the uniform she had earned through blood and sacrifice. "I should get back to work," Sarah said quietly. "Oh, come on," Jake pressed. "We're just curious. It's not every day you see someone with such elaborate military cosplay. Did you at least research what those symbols mean? Because that Force Recon skull, that's elite stuff. Like top 1% of Marines. And you're telling me someone with those credentials is working at a diner?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Sarah looked at the 3 young faces staring at her with mixture of amusement and derision. They had no idea they were sitting 3 feet away from someone who had spent 5 years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Someone who had earned every piece of ink on her skin through missions that existed only in classified files. Her mind flashed to Kandahar Province, 2018, the weight of her pack as she moved through the mountain passes with her team. The responsibility of calling in airstrikes that would save American lives. The feeling of carrying wounded teammates to safety under enemy fire. These memories lived in her bones, in the scars hidden beneath her clothes, in the tattoos these kids were mocking as fake. "Those coordinates on your wrist," Emma pointed out, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Did you just pick random numbers because actual military coordinates would mean something specific?" Sarah glanced down at the numbers tattooed in precise military font. 34 degrees 31, 12N 69 degrees 2024E. Those coordinates marked the spot where she had lost her first teammate, where Corporal David Chen had died in her arms after an IED explosion tore through their convoy. Every morning when she woke up, those numbers were the first thing she saw. "They're not random," she said softly. "Right," Marcus laughed. "I bet if we looked them up, they'd point to some random field in Kansas or something." People who get fake military tattoos never do the research properly. Jake pulled out his phone. Let's check. What's the worst that could happen? We'll either prove they're real, which would be amazing, or we'll expose some stolen valor, which would be doing a public service. Sarah watched him type the coordinates into his mapping application. She knew exactly what would appear on his screen. She had looked up those same coordinates 1,000 times, torturing herself with satellite images of the place where everything changed. The blood drained from Jake's face as the map loaded. This can't be right. What is it? Emma asked, leaning over to look at the phone. It's Afghanistan, Marcus whispered, his earlier bravado completely gone. Eastern Afghanistan, like really remote mountain area. The three students looked up at Sarah with completely different expressions now. The smugness had been replaced by something approaching shock, maybe even fear. They were beginning to realize they might have made a serious mistake. How did you know those coordinates? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked at these three young people who had spent the last 10 minutes dissecting her life, her service, her sacrifice. They reminded her of herself at their age, before the Corps had shown her what she was truly capable of, before she learned that strength came in many forms, and that the most dangerous people were often the ones who looked least threatening. Maybe you should finish your project, she suggested, her voice still quiet, but carrying a new weight that made all three students sit up straighter. As she walked away, Sarah heard their urgent, whispered conversation behind her. They were probably Googling force reconnaissance now, learning about selection rates that made Navy SEAL training look easy. They might discover that fewer than 2% of Marines ever earned the right to wear those crossed rifles. They might read about missions in places like Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, where small teams of Force Recon Marines operated behind enemy lines for weeks at a time. But they would never understand the full story. They would never know about the night she spent pinned down by enemy fire in a compound outside Fallujah, calling in danger close air support while protecting intelligence assets. They would never know about the hostage rescue in Somalia that officially never happened. They would never know about the 47 missions that had earned her a Bronze Star with V device, a Purple Heart, and enough classified commendations to fill a file cabinet. Most importantly, they would never know about the cost. The way she still woke up screaming some nights, the way crowded spaces made her reach for weapons that weren't there. The way she had chosen to work in a small-town diner because the simple, predictable routine helped keep the demons at bay. The afternoon continued with Sarah serving other customers, most of whom treated her with the casual indifference of people who saw service workers as part of the furniture. But she could feel the three students watching her, their entire worldview quietly crumbling as they processed what they had stumbled into. Around 4 o'clock, an older man entered the diner. Sarah recognized him immediately as Frank Morrison, a Vietnam veteran who came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie. Frank had the particular way of moving that marked him as former military, and Sarah had always appreciated that he never asked questions about her service. He simply acknowledged her with the subtle nod that passed between veterans. "Afternoon, Marine," Frank said as he took his usual seat at the counter. The word carried across the diner like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. The three college students turned to stare as this distinguished older man, whose own military bearing was unmistakable, addressed their waitress with obvious respect. "Afternoon, sir," Sarah replied, pouring his coffee without being asked. "Heard some interesting chatter when I walked in," Frank said, his voice carrying that particular authority that came from 3 tours in Southeast Asia. Young folks debating military service. Always interesting to hear civilians explain what real soldiers look like. Sarah glanced back at the corner booth where the 3 students sat frozen, clearly understanding they were being discussed. People see what they expect to see. She replied diplomatically. Frank nodded slowly, studying her tattoos with the eye of someone who understood military symbology. "Force Recon, huh? That's serious business. How many deployments?" 5, Sarah answered simply. "Afghanistan? Mostly. Some other places." Frank's expression grew more serious. "Recent? Got out 2 years ago." The conversation was conducted in the shorthand that veterans used, each question and answer conveying volumes of information to anyone who understood the language. Frank was clearly impressed, and he wasn't trying to hide it. "Thank you for your service, Marine," he said formally. "And welcome home." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. In 2 years of civilian life, very few people had said those words to her with genuine understanding. Most people either ignored her service entirely or treated it as an abstract concept divorced from reality. Behind her, she heard chairs scraping as the 3 college students prepared to leave. They left money on the table and hurried toward the exit. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. As they reached the door, Jake turned back. "Ma'am?" he called out. Sarah looked up from Frank's coffee. We're sorry. We were way out of line. We didn't know." Sarah nodded acknowledgement but didn't speak. There wasn't much to say. They hadn't known because they hadn't bothered to know. They had made assumptions based on their limited experience and narrow expectations of what a warrior looked like. After they left, Frank raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "To the young Marines who keep the wolves away from the door." Sarah touched her own cup to his. Semper Fi. As the afternoon light slanted through the diner windows, Sarah continued her work with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. But something had shifted. For the first time in months, she felt a small spark of pride in who she was and what she had accomplished. The tattoos on her arms weren't just ink. They were a record of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood that could never be taken away. They marked her as part of something larger than herself, something that 3 college students with their assumptions and ignorance could never touch or diminish. But this was just the beginning. Word traveled fast in small towns, and Sarah was about to discover that her quiet life in Cedar Falls was about to become much more complicated. The next morning brought an unexpected change to Sarah's routine. As she arrived at Mike's diner for the early shift, she noticed several vehicles in the parking lot that didn't belong to the usual breakfast crowd. A pristine pickup truck with veteran license plates sat next to an older sedan bearing American flag bumper stickers. Inside, the atmosphere felt different. Word of yesterday's encounter had spread through Cedar Falls with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. But instead of the negative attention Sarah had expected, she found herself greeted by a collection of older men nursing coffee at various tables, all of them clearly military veterans. Frank Morrison sat at his usual spot at the counter, but today he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a stocky man with graying hair and the distinctive bearing of former military leadership. "Sarah," Frank called out as she tied her apron. "Like you to meet Command Sergeant Major Bill Tucker, Army Rangers. Retired, of course." "Bill, this is the Marine I was telling you about." Tucker extended his hand with the firm grip that spoke of decades in uniform. "Frank tells me you're Force Recon." "That's impressive work." "Thank you, Sergeant Major," Sarah replied, falling automatically into the respectful tone that came naturally around senior non-commissioned officers, even retired ones. "None of that. Call me Bill. We're all civilians here." His smile was genuine, carrying the warmth that existed between veterans regardless of service branch. "Though I have to ask, how did you end up in Cedar Falls?" "Not exactly a military town." Sarah poured coffee for both men, considering her answer. "Sometimes quiet is exactly what you need." Bill nodded with understanding. "I get that. Did my time in the sandbox, too." Different war, same feelings afterward. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself in conversations she hadn't expected. A table of Navy veterans peppered her with good-natured questions about inter-service rivalry. An Air Force retiree wanted to know if the stories about Force Recon selection were as brutal as he'd heard. A former Army medic shared his own struggles with civilian transition. The attention was overwhelming but different from what she had experienced yesterday. These men understood military service in a way that went beyond surface-level respect. They knew about the culture, the brotherhood, the unique challenges of transitioning back to civilian life. Around 10 o'clock, the diner door chimed as someone new entered. Sarah looked up to see a young woman about her own age, wearing jeans and a hoodie that couldn't quite conceal her own military bearing. The woman scanned the room with the automatic threat assessment that never really left people who had served in combat zones. "Excuse me," she said to Sarah. "Are you the Marine everyone's talking about?" "That depends on what they're saying," Sarah replied cautiously. The woman smiled. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, Army Military Police. Did 2 tours in Iraq. I heard about what happened yesterday with those college kids, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For not letting them get away with it. for showing them that veterans come in all shapes, sizes, and genders, for representing for those of us who don't fit their stereotype. Jennifer's words resonated with something deep inside Sarah. She had never thought of her response to the students as representing anyone beyond herself, but she was beginning to understand that her visibility mattered in ways she hadn't considered. "Buy you a cup of coffee?" Jennifer asked. "I'd love to hear about Force Recon from someone who actually did it, instead of the Hollywood version." Sarah found herself sitting across from Jennifer during her break, sharing stories about military life with someone who truly understood the experience. Jennifer had faced her own challenges as a female MP, dealing with assumptions about women in combat roles and the constant need to prove herself worthy of the uniform. "The hardest part," Jennifer explained, "isn't the physical stuff. It's the way people look at you afterward, like you're either damaged goods or some kind of superhero. There's no middle ground for them." Sarah nodded. "People either think you're broken or they think you're invincible. They don't understand that you can be both at the same time." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man Sarah didn't recognize. He was younger than most of the morning's visitors, maybe early 30s, with the lean build and alert eyes that marked him as active duty or recent veteran. He approached their table with visible nervousness. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "I'm looking for Sarah Martinez. Marine Force Recon?" "That's me," Sarah replied cautiously. "I'm Ryan Cooper, Marine Corps recruiter here in town. I've been getting phone calls all morning about you." Sarah's blood went cold. Phone calls could mean many things, most of them bad. "What kind of phone calls?" "The good kind," Ryan said quickly, reading her expression. "Local VFW wants to invite you to speak at their next meeting. Chamber of Commerce is asking about you for their Veterans Day event. And I've had 3 high school kids call asking about Force Recon because they heard there was a real one working in town." The weight of sudden attention pressed down on Sarah like a physical force. She had chosen Cedar Falls specifically because it allowed her to be anonymous, to fade into the background while she figured out how to be a civilian. Now that anonymity was evaporating. "I'm not really a public speaking person," she said. "I understand that," Ryan replied. "But you might not have a choice anymore. Word is spreading beyond Cedar Falls. Someone posted about yesterday's incident on social media, and it's getting shared pretty widely." Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a Facebook post that made her stomach drop. Someone had written a detailed account of the confrontation at the diner, complete with a photo taken without her knowledge. The post had been shared hundreds of times, with comments ranging from supportive to skeptical to downright hostile. "This is exactly what I didn't want," Sarah muttered. "I know," Jennifer said sympathetically. "Privacy becomes a luxury once people decide you're a symbol of something." Ryan leaned forward. "Look, I've been recruiting for 8 years. I've seen what happens when veterans try to disappear completely. Sometimes visibility is healthier than isolation, even when it's uncomfortable." "Easy for you to say," Sarah shot back. "You're not the one who's about to become a local curiosity." "Actually, I am," Ryan said quietly. "I lost my leg in Ramadi. Took me 3 years to be willing to wear shorts in public because I didn't want to deal with the stares and questions. But when I finally did, I discovered that visibility comes with power. The power to change minds, to inspire kids who need heroes. To show people that veterans are more than their assumptions." Sarah looked at this recruiter who couldn't be much older than herself, trying to reconcile his words with her own fears about exposure. She had spent 2 years trying to blend in, to be normal, to escape the weight of her experiences. But maybe that had been the wrong approach. "What exactly are people saying?" she asked. Jennifer scrolled through her phone. Mostly positive stuff. Veterans supporting you, people apologizing for the way civilians sometimes treat service members, parents saying their kids need to see that heroes don't always look like movie stars. "But there's negative stuff too," Ryan added honestly. "People questioning your service, demanding proof, saying women can't really be Force Recon. The usual internet garbage. "Force Recon doesn't take women," said a voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see a middle-aged man she didn't recognize, his face flushed with alcohol despite the early hour. "Everyone knows that. So either you're lying or you're some kind of special case that proves nothing." The diner went quiet. Every veteran present turned to look at the man, their collective attention creating a pressure that would have made most people reconsider their position. But this man was too drunk or too committed to his ignorance to back down. "I served 20 years in the army," he continued, his voice getting louder. "I know what real soldiers look like. And she ain't it. Probably some clerk who's inflating her record to get attention." Frank Morrison stood up slowly, his Vietnam veteran status giving him automatic authority among the assembled former military. "Mister, you need to watch your mouth." "Why? Because I'm calling out stolen valor when I see it? Force Recon is elite. They don't take diversity hires." The insult hit Sarah like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Jennifer was on her feet. "You want to see stolen valor? Let's talk about your 20 years as a cook at Fort Bragg pretending to be infantry." "How did you?" The man started, then stopped as he realized Jennifer had somehow identified his actual military occupational specialty. "Military police, remember? I can spot a fake warrior from across the room. Now sit down before this gets embarrassing for you." The man looked around the diner, finally noticing that every person present was staring at him, with expressions ranging from disgust to barely controlled anger. He mumbled something about his check and hurried toward the exit, leaving behind the smell of cheap liquor and embarrassment. "How did you know he was a cook?" Sarah asked. Jennifer shrugged. "I didn't. But men who feel the need to challenge women's service records usually have something to prove about their own. It was a safe bet he wasn't infantry." The incident had shifted something in the room. Sarah realized that the attention she had been dreading wasn't entirely negative. She was surrounded by people who understood her service and were willing to defend it. The isolation she had been cultivating was protecting her from negative encounters, but it was also cutting her off from positive connections. Ryan seemed to sense her changing mood. "The offer to speak at the VFW still stands. No pressure, but they meet Thursday nights if you're interested." Sarah looked around the diner at the collection of veterans who had shown up to support someone they barely knew, simply because she had served. She thought about the high school kids who were asking about Force Recon because they had heard there was a real one in town. She thought about Jennifer's words about representing women who didn't fit stereotypes. "What would I even talk about?" she asked. "The truth," Frank said simply. "Your story, what it was really like, not the Hollywood version. And maybe," Jennifer added, "what it's like coming home, because that's the part they never show in the movies." Sarah felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she had been carrying for 2 years without realizing it. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from her service and start claiming it. Maybe the cost of invisibility was higher than the price of exposure. "Thursday nights," she asked Ryan. 7 o'clock. American Legion Hall on Maple Street. "I'll think about it." As the lunch rush began to pick up, Sarah returned to work with a new sense of purpose. The tattoos on her arms felt different now, not like evidence to be hidden, but like badges to be worn with pride. She had earned every piece of ink through sacrifice and service, and perhaps it was time to stop apologizing for who she was. But even as she felt this new confidence growing, Sarah had no idea that her story was about to take another dramatic turn. The social media attention Ryan had mentioned was about to bring visitors to Cedar Falls, who would challenge everything she thought she knew about moving forward from her military past. Thursday evening arrived faster than Sarah had expected. She stood outside the American Legion Hall on Maple Street, staring at the modest brick building while wrestling with second thoughts that threatened to send her home. Through the windows, she could see the warm glow of fluorescent lights and the silhouettes of people gathered inside. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "You've got this, Marine. Remember? They invited you because they want to hear your story." Sarah took a deep breath and pushed through the front door. The interior was exactly what she had expected from a small-town veterans organization. Worn but clean linoleum floors, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a small stage, and walls covered with decades of military memorabilia. American flags from various eras hung alongside unit patches, faded photographs, and plaques commemorating local veterans. Frank Morrison spotted her immediately and walked over with a welcoming smile. "Glad you decided to come. We've got about 30 people tonight, which is a good turnout for us." Sarah scanned the room, noting the mix of ages and service branches represented. Most were older men from the Vietnam era, but she spotted several younger veterans and was surprised to see 3 women among the attendees. Jennifer sat in the front row, offering an encouraging nod. No pressure, Frank continued, but we usually have speakers talk for about 20 minutes, then take questions. You can share as much or as little as you want. Before Sarah could respond, the hall's main door opened to admit two unexpected visitors. A man in his 50s entered first, wearing a suit that marked him as someone important. Behind him walked a woman about Sarah's age, dressed in business casual and carrying a professional camera. "Frank Morrison?" the man asked, approaching them with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what they wanted. "I'm David Chen. This is my colleague Maria Santos from Channel 7 News. We're here about the Marine Force Recon veteran." Sarah's stomach dropped at the mention of her service, but the name David Chen triggered a different kind of shock. She stared at the man's face, searching for familiar features, and found them in his eyes in the shape of his jaw. "Are you related to Corporal David Chen?" she asked quietly. The question stopped the news team in their tracks. David Chen's professional composure cracked, replaced by something vulnerable and hopeful. "Yes, he was my son." "How did you—" Sarah looked at this man whose son had died in her arms 5 years ago, whose coordinates were tattooed on her wrist, whose memory had haunted her dreams for longer than she cared to count. She had always wondered about David's family, had imagined writing them a letter 1,000 times, but never found the courage to intrude on their grief with her own. "I served with him," she said simply. "In Afghanistan." David Chen's carefully maintained professional demeanor completely dissolved. "You knew my boy." The entire VFW meeting had stopped to watch this unexpected reunion. Sarah felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes, but her focus was entirely on this father who had lost his son half a world away. "I was his team leader," Sarah said. "He was a good Marine, a good man." "Were you?" David's voice broke slightly. "Were you there when he—" "Yes, sir. I was with him." The silence in the room was complete. Even Maria Santos had lowered her camera, recognizing that whatever was happening between these two people was too sacred for casual documentation. David Chen looked at the woman standing in front of him, this young Latina who had shared his son's final moments. "I've wanted to meet someone who knew him over there. The Corps gave us the official report, but I've always wondered about the person behind it." Frank Morrison stepped in gently. "Maybe you two would like to talk privately? We can postpone the speaking engagement." Sarah looked around the room at the veterans who had come to hear her story. She thought about Jennifer's words about representation, about Ryan's observations about the power of visibility. Then she looked back at David Chen, who was still processing the impossible coincidence that had brought him face to face with someone from his son's final mission. "Actually," she said, "maybe this is exactly the right time to tell the story." She walked to the small stage, accepting the wireless microphone that Frank handed her. The 30 assembled veterans settled into their seats, sensing that they were about to hear something more personal than the usual war stories. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began, her voice steady despite the emotional undertone. "I served 5 years in the Marine Corps, the last 3 as a team leader with Force Reconnaissance Company. I deployed to Afghanistan 5 times between 2016 and 2020. She paused, looking directly at David Chen. "One of the Marines under my command was Corporal David Chen. He died on September 15, 2019 in Kandahar Province, when our convoy hit an improvised explosive device." Maria Santos had her camera rolling now, but discreetly, understanding that this was more than a news story. "This was a memorial. David was 22 years old," Sarah continued. "He was smart, funny, and absolutely fearless. He could disarm an IED faster than anyone I ever worked with, and he never met a piece of technology he couldn't figure out. But more than that, he was the kind of Marine who made everyone around him better." David Chen wiped his eyes, hanging on every word. "The day we lost David, we were returning from a reconnaissance mission near the Pakistan border. It was supposed to be routine, but nothing in Afghanistan was ever really routine. The IED was buried deeper than usual, sophisticated enough to penetrate our vehicle's armor. David took the worst of the blast." Sarah's voice caught slightly, but she continued. "I want you to know that he didn't suffer. The medics were with him immediately, and he was unconscious almost instantly. But in those final moments when he was still aware, he asked me to tell his family that he was proud to serve and that he loved them." The silence in the room was profound. Several of the older veterans were openly crying, remembering their own losses from different wars. Frank Morrison stood at attention by the American flag, his hand over his heart. "I've carried David's memory with me every day since Afghanistan," Sarah said. "The coordinates where we lost him are tattooed on my wrist because I never want to forget where he gave his life for his country and his fellow Marines." She looked around the room, taking in the faces of veterans from Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. "People ask me what Force Recon was like, what combat was like, what it means to serve. But the truth is, none of that matters as much as the people you serve with. David Chen was my teammate, my responsibility, and my brother. Losing him taught me that the real cost of freedom isn't paid by politicians or generals. It's paid by 2-year-old kids from small towns who believe in something bigger than themselves." David Chen stood up slowly. Could I say something?" Sarah nodded and handed him the microphone. "My son joined the Marines against my wishes," David said, his voice shaking. "I wanted him to go to college, to have a safe life, to follow a path that wouldn't put him in danger. We argued about it. The last conversation we had before he deployed, I told him I thought he was making a mistake." He paused, composing himself. "I've regretted those words every day for 5 years. But hearing Sergeant Martinez tonight, hearing about who my son was as a Marine, I finally understand what he was trying to tell me. He wasn't just serving his country. He was serving alongside people like this, people who would remember him, honor him, carry him with them." David turned to Sarah. "Thank you for being with him. Thank you for bringing him home. And thank you for keeping his memory alive." The question and answer session that followed was unlike anything the VFW had ever experienced. Veterans shared their own stories of loss and brotherhood. Younger attendees asked serious questions about military service that went far beyond the usual recruiting poster version. Maria Santos found herself documenting not just one veteran's story, but an entire community's relationship with military service and sacrifice. One high school senior raised his hand. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about joining the Marines. After hearing your story, I'm wondering if I'm tough enough for something like Force Recon." Sarah considered the question carefully. The physical requirements are real, and they're demanding, but the most important quality isn't toughness in the way most people think about it. It's the ability to put other people before yourself consistently, even when it's difficult or dangerous. That's something you can develop regardless of where you start. An older veteran asked, "How do you deal with the memories, the tough ones?" "Some days better than others," Sarah admitted. "I've learned that isolation makes it worse. Talking to people who understand, staying connected to the community, finding ways to honor the people we lost. It's not about forgetting or getting over it. It's about carrying it in a way that honors their sacrifice." After the formal meeting ended, small groups continued talking in the parking lot. David Chan approached Sarah with business cards for grief counselors and veteran support groups, resources he had discovered during his own journey through loss. They exchanged contact information and made plans to visit David's grave together. Jennifer walked out with Sarah, both women quiet as they processed the evening's unexpected emotional weight. "That wasn't what I expected when I encouraged you to speak," Jennifer said. "Me neither. But maybe it was what needed to happen." Maria Santos caught up with them at Sarah's car. "I want you to know, we're not going to air this without your permission. What happened in there was too personal for drive-by journalism." Sarah appreciated the gesture, but she was beginning to understand that her story was bigger than her own comfort level. "Actually, I think people should see it. Maybe it'll help other families, other veterans. Are you sure?" Sarah looked back at the Legion Hall, where veterans were still talking in small groups, sharing stories and connections that might not have happened without tonight's catalyst. "I spent 2 years trying to hide from my service," she said. "I thought anonymity would protect me from judgment, from assumptions, from having to relive difficult memories. But tonight showed me that sharing those memories might be more important than protecting them." As she drove home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. The college students who had mocked her tattoos had unknowingly started a chain of events that led to this moment of connection and healing. But even as she felt a new sense of purpose settling over her, Sarah had no idea that her story was about to reach far beyond Cedar Falls. The news segment would air in 3 days, and with it would come opportunities and challenges that would test everything she thought she knew about moving forward from her military past. The quiet life she had built in this small Iowa town was about to become something entirely different, and Sarah Martinez was about to discover that sometimes the most important missions come after you take off the uniform. The news segment aired on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the VFW meeting. Sarah watched it at home with Jennifer and Frank Morrison, all three of them crowded around her small television. Maria Santos had done exactly what she promised, focusing on the story of military service and sacrifice rather than sensationalizing the initial confrontation at the diner. The piece opened with B-roll footage of Sarah working at Mike's diner, her tattoos clearly visible as she served coffee. Maria's voiceover explained the misconceptions that led to the confrontation, then transitioned to highlights from the VFW speech. The camera captured David Chen's emotional words about his son, and Sarah's response about carrying the memories of fallen teammates. "It's a powerful story about hidden heroes among us," Maria concluded, "and a reminder that veterans come in all forms." In Cedar Falls, Iowa, I'm Maria Santos, Channel 7 News. Sarah's phone started ringing before the segment finished airing. The first call came from her former commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson, who had tracked down her number through official channels. "Martinez," he said when she answered, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine affection. "I just saw the news piece. Outstanding work representing the Corps." "Sir," Sarah replied, automatically falling back into military formality despite being out of uniform for 2 years. "None of that. It's Jim now. I wanted you to know that your old teammates have been sharing the video all over social media. They're proud as hell to see you out there telling the real story." The call lasted 20 minutes, with Colonel Patterson filling her in on the current status of their old unit and asking about her transition to civilian life. When she mentioned her struggles with isolation, he grew serious. "You know the Corps has been working on veteran outreach programs, real ones, not just bureaucratic check-the-box initiatives. We could use someone with your experience and communication skills, someone who understands what it's like coming home." "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that," Sarah said honestly. "Think about it. The offer stands whenever you are ready." The second call came from her younger brother Miguel in Los Angeles. "Hermana, you're famous. Mom called crying because she finally got to see what you did over there. She's been telling everyone in the neighborhood that her daughter is a war hero." Sarah smiled despite herself. Her relationship with her family had been complicated since returning from Afghanistan. They loved her, but they had never really understood what she had experienced or why it was so difficult to talk about. The news segment had apparently bridged that gap in ways that years of private conversations hadn't managed. The third call changed everything. It came from a number she didn't recognize, with a professional-sounding woman on the other end. "Ms. Martinez? This is Karen Sullivan from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I saw your story on the news, and I wanted to discuss a potential opportunity with you." Sarah listened as Karen explained a new program designed to improve veteran services and outreach. They were looking for combat veterans to serve as advocates and liaisons, helping other veterans navigate the complex systems of benefits and support services. The position would be based in Des Moines, Karen continued, but would involve travel throughout Iowa and potentially other states. "We need someone who understands both military culture and the challenges of transitioning to civilian life." "What kind of qualifications are you looking for?" Sarah asked. "Honestly, what you demonstrated in that news segment. The ability to connect with veterans, to speak authentically about service and sacrifice, and to represent the diversity of people who serve. Your Force Recon background doesn't hurt either. It gives you credibility with the hardcore veterans who are often the hardest to reach." Sarah asked for time to consider the offer, but even as she hung up the phone, she could feel something shifting inside her. The isolation and anonymity she had craved for 2 years was beginning to feel less like protection and more like a waste of her experience and abilities. Over the following week, similar calls kept coming. A nonprofit organization working with female veterans wanted her to speak at their annual conference. A military museum asked her to consult on an exhibit about women in combat roles. 3 different universities invited her to lecture about military service and veteran reintegration. But the call that affected her most came from an unexpected source. It was a teenage girl named Amanda from Nebraska, whose voice shook with nervousness as she explained her situation. "I saw your story on YouTube," Amanda said. I'm 17, and I want to join the Marines after high school. But everyone keeps telling me girls can't do combat jobs, that I'm not strong enough, that I should consider the Air Force instead. My dad says women in the military are just for show. Sarah felt a familiar anger rising, the same frustration she had felt listening to the college students mock her service. But now she understood that her visibility could be a tool for change rather than just a source of personal discomfort. "What do you want to do in the Marines?" Sarah asked. "Infantry, maybe. Or something in special operations eventually. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been training for 3 years. I can do more pull-ups than most of the boys in my school. It doesn't sound crazy at all. But you need to understand what you're signing up for. It's not just about physical capability. It's about being willing to sacrifice everything for the people next to you." They talked for nearly an hour, with Sarah providing realistic information about military service while encouraging Amanda's determination to pursue her goals. By the end of the conversation, Sarah realized she had found something she was good at, something that mattered beyond her own healing process. That weekend, she drove to Des Moines to meet with Karen Sullivan about the VA position. The building was everything she expected from a government office: beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the particular smell of bureaucracy. But Karen herself was different, a Navy veteran with an easy manner and obvious passion for her work. "Let me show you what we're trying to accomplish," Karen said, leading Sarah to a conference room covered with charts and statistics: veteran suicide rates, homeless numbers, unemployment figures, educational attainment gaps. The data is sobering, but it's also actionable if we can find the right people to reach these veterans. Sarah studied the information, recognizing patterns that matched her own experience and that of veterans she had met. "What makes you think I can help with this?" "Because you've been there," Karen replied simply. "You understand military culture, you've experienced the transition challenges, and you have credibility with the veteran community. Plus, that news segment showed you can communicate complex emotions in ways that connect with people. What about my lack of experience with social services, government programs, all the bureaucratic stuff?" Karen laughed. "We can teach you the bureaucratic stuff. We can't teach someone how to earn the respect of a Marine who's been living under a bridge for 6 months because he's too proud to ask for help. That's something you either have or you don't." The position would mean leaving Cedar Falls, giving up the quiet life she had built at Mike's Diner. But as Sarah drove back through the Iowa countryside, she found herself thinking about Amanda's phone call, about David Chen's father, about all the veterans she had met who were struggling with their own transitions. She stopped at the diner for what she realized might be one of her last shifts. Mike Kowalski, the owner, was waiting for her with a knowing smile. "So," he said, "I guess you won't be needing this job much longer." "How did you know?" "Frank Morrison told me about all the opportunities coming your way. Plus, I've had about 20 people this week tell me I should be proud to have a war hero working in my diner." Sarah felt a familiar discomfort with the term hero, but Mike continued before she could object. "I want you to know, you've been one of the best employees I've ever had. Reliable, professional, good with customers even when they didn't deserve it. But more than that, you've brought something to this place that we didn't know we were missing." "What's that?" "Purpose. These old veterans who've been coming in to meet you, they've been connecting with each other in ways they haven't for years. You've reminded them that their service mattered, that they're part of something bigger than themselves." The evening shift passed quickly, with several regular customers stopping by to wish her well. Frank Morrison brought her a small American flag that had flown over the Legion Hall. Jennifer presented her with a challenge coin from her old MP unit. Even Ryan Cooper, the Marine recruiter, stopped in to tell her that 3 young people had inquired about Force Recon after hearing her story. As she finished her last shift, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 2 weeks. The college students who had mocked her tattoos as fake had unknowingly triggered a series of events that led her to rediscover her sense of mission and purpose. She accepted the VA position the next Monday, beginning a new career focused on helping other veterans navigate their own transitions, from military to civilian life. The work was challenging, often frustrating, and emotionally demanding, but it was also deeply meaningful in ways that serving coffee had never been. 6 months later, Sarah found herself standing before an audience of 200 veterans at a conference in Chicago. Her role as veteran advocate had evolved to include public speaking, policy consultation, and program development. The shy, isolated woman who had hidden behind anonymity in Cedar Falls had become a recognized voice in veteran affairs. People ask me what it's like to transition from military service, she told the audience. They want to know about the challenges, the obstacles, the difficulties of adapting to civilian life. And those things are real. But what I've learned is that the most dangerous thing isn't the struggle itself. It's the isolation that comes from thinking you have to face that struggle alone. In the audience, she spotted several familiar faces. Bull. David Chen's father had become an advocate for Gold Star families. Jennifer Walsh had started a non-profit supporting female veterans. Even Amanda from Nebraska was there, now a Marine recruit preparing for boot camp. Your service didn't end when you took off the uniform, Sarah continued. It evolved. The mission now is to take care of each other, to share our stories, to help the next generation understand what service really means. And that mission is just as important as anything we did overseas. As applause filled the auditorium, Sarah thought about the tattoos on her arms that had started this entire journey. The coordinates, the unit insignia, the symbols of brotherhood and sacrifice. They were no longer hidden beneath long sleeves or dismissed as fake. They were displayed proudly as evidence of service, sacrifice, and the ongoing mission to take care of her fellow veterans. The college students who had mocked those tattoos would probably never know how their casual cruelty had inadvertently launched Sarah on a path toward helping thousands of veterans. But perhaps that was fitting. Sometimes the most important transformations begin with the smallest acts of disrespect that force us to stand up and claim our truth. Sarah Martinez had finally found her place in the civilian world, not by hiding from her military past, but by embracing it fully and using it to serve others. The mission continued, just in a different uniform and on a different battlefield. And every day, she proved that real warriors come in many forms, with many stories, all of them worthy of respect, and all of them essential to the ongoing work of building a better world.